This Torah class is brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.
Okay, good morning, Rabbi. This morning we're going to be doing something a little bit differently. We're going to be learning Parshas Rabbi, since we don't have an opportunity to get together during the rest of the week. And I would like to explore a few aspects of the Parsha based on the writings of the Malbim. I had the privilege this week to visit my grandfather, Glatstein, in Pittsburgh. And my grandfather has a very strong connection to the Malbim. His grandfather was a Rav, together with the Malbim in Linschitz at the end of the 19th century. And my grandfather has devoted a very large part of his life to learning the Parsha of the Malbim on Tanakh. In fact, I have over here my grandfather's personal Malbim that was published in the end of the 1800s with, as you could see, hundreds and hundreds of papers, notes and hagais, and on notes here on the Malbim on Devarim, notes on the Malbim on Yecheskel, on the Malbim on Mishlei. It's very interesting. The Malbim is really a luminary that, as appreciated as he is, people are not makir his greatness. Because it is said in the Olam HaYeshivas, especially by the Briskers, they say there are three achronim that have the koyach of a Rishon. Three sages who lived in the last 500 years that actually have the force of sages that lived in the times of the Rishonim, from the year 900 to 1500. Who are they? So the Briskers say, of course, the Vilna Gaon, which is unanimously recognized. The Gaon was like a Rishon. The Gaon would even argue with Rishonim sometimes. They would say Reb Chaim Brisker, right? Because the Briskers say Reb Chaim, and the Malbim. In fact, the Beis Halevi once said, and I have it in a print, Beis Halevi said that there's a pasuk in Tehillim that none of the Mefarshim were able to explain. None of the Mefarshim, none of the Rishonim even, except the Malbim. The Beis Halevi said the only way the Malbim was able to explain this pasuk was Beruach HaKodesh. The Chafetz Chaim, when he writes about his own Perush, I believe on the Taras Koyanim, the Chafetz Chaim writes, I'm not writing it like a Gadol b'Yisrael would write. And says the Chafetz Chaim, and what's an example of a Gadol b'Yisrael? The Malbim, the Chafetz Chaim says. So the Malbim was highly recognized as a towering mind. Okay, so I want to just explore a few things in the beginning of the Parsha. Okay, the first pasuk says, Re'ei Anochi Noisein Lefnechem Hayom Bracha Klala. See that I give you today blessing and curse. What in the world is a pasuk saying? Right? We read it, Re'ei Anochi, right? We read it, we understand. What does this mean? See that I give you today blessing and curse. First of all, what does it mean, see? God presented them with like two boxes, and behind, do you know what's in box number 1? Look, blessing. And look what's in box number 2. What does it mean, see? What are they looking at? What does it mean, hayom? What's the point of this pasuk? Okay, so Parshas Eikev, the Parsha before Re'eh, speaks about the reward that God will give us if we keep the Torah, and the punishment we'll get for violating the Torah. Whereupon Parshas Re'eh says the following: Re'eh, see, Anochi noisein lefnechem hayom. I am placing before you today bracha uklala, blessing and curse. That means like this. The Malbim points out that the Torah is different than any of the documents of the nations of the world. The documents of all the nations of the world are full of promises of the world to come. You look in the documents of any of the ancient religions or any of the modern religions, all the promises are, you keep the law, you'll get this in the world to come, you'll get that in the world to come, paradise, it's full of paradise. Guess how many times the Chumash explicitly talks about the world to come? 0. The world to come, Olam Haba, is only alluded to, but is not explicitly mentioned. Of course, in the Mishnayos, in Tarsha Ba'al Peh, Olam Hazeh doimeh leproizu b'fnei Olam Haba. Certainly the world to come is one of the most fundamental principles of our religion. Mesilas Yesharim says, Yisoid HaChasidus, v'sharash ha'avodah t'mima. Sheyizbar, we have to know what we're here for. We're here to gain Olam Haba. And yet the Chumash makes no explicit, they're veiled references. Tamais nafshi mais yesharim. He was gathered unto his forefathers, but there are no explicit, doesn't talk about what Olam Haba is like, that it's wonderful, it's pleasurable. Everything in the Torah speaks about this world. That if you keep the Torah, you'll have rain, you'll have parnasa, you'll have health, right, and so forth. Your family will be successful. The only promises given in the Torah are promises of this world. Says the Malbim, that is what this week's Parsha is emphasizing. After Parshas Eikev, which discussed that if we keep the Torah, God will reward us with rain, with children, with family, with success, with physical benefit, What's Parshas Re'eh saying? Parshas Re'eh says, look how everything I tell you, God says, is for today. I'm not giving you any promises for the future. You know why? Because if you tell somebody, join me, I'll hire you, I'm not going to give you a salary, but when you retire in 50 years, will I reward you? So if you're a sane person, you're thinking to yourself, can I trust this guy? How do I know this guy will come through for me? He's promising me something in the far-off future, I can't trust him. So says Rabbi Sham, I know that if I tell you, keep the mitzvahs because of Olam Haba, as much as you know I'm the creator of the universe, but something that's promised for the future, people always have questions about. They can't be guaranteed, they can't be certain. And therefore says God, whatever I tell you, Re'eh, look, I give you everything today. All my promises. You keep the Torah, you'll have rain today. You'll have health today, meaning in this world. In this world. All the reward mentioned in Eikev, Re'eh, Anoichi Noisen Lefnechem Hayom. Okay. That's an important principle to remember, that all the promises of the Torah are not for Olam Haba, are for Olam Hazeh. However, the Malbim explains, even though the reward in this world is something that is inexplicable. If I put on tefillin, it's going to rain more. How is my tefillin going to affect the rain? You could say if you preserve the oceans and you don't throw soda cans in the oceans, so the water in the ocean will remain pure, and that will produce rain, and then you'll have rain. So you want to say, preserve the ecological systems and you'll have rain. That I get. But that, don't speak Lashon Hara and you'll have rain. Don't speak Lashon Hara and your stocks will go up. Don't speak Lashon Hara and you'll do better business. What does one thing have to do? What is my business? What do my customers have to do with whether I learn every day or whether I daven properly? That's something that doesn't make any sense. It's, cause and effect. I don't see the cause and effect. What should one thing have to do with another? I'm going to be healthier because I wear tzitzis. Well, what does my health have to do with tzitzis? If I eat properly and I exercise, I'll be healthy. What does it have to do with my observance of mitzvahs? Says the Malbim. Haidia, what the Torah is saying is kiloi kasher yeduma, not like you think. Don't make the mistake that rain is a natural process, that your finances are dependent on your business acumen. Most people think ein lahem shum kesher im chuke haschar va'onesh she'eza kesher yesh l'chug hashamayim hamashalach b'ma'areches. What is the rain? What does the weather have to do? That means you're saying if the Jewish people don't act properly, there's going to be drought? Drought has nothing to do with our actions. Drought is dependent on a different combination of the wind and the angle of the sun at a certain time, and if certain factors come together, that will produce drought. No, that's how it produces drought. If the Jews don't learn Torah, that produces drought. What does us learning Torah, not learning Torah have to do with the security, right? What is our observance of mitzvahs affects the security of Israel? Israel's security is dependent on whether the prime minister deals in a correct diplomatic way. If he makes the right maneuvers, then we'll be secure. If he doesn't, no. The security of the state of Israel is dependent on whether before I eat, I make a bracha properly. My bracha affects the state of Israel. Yeah. How? That's how God set up the world. that even though it looks like there's a natural process, and this is echoing the words of the Ramban at the end of Parshas Boy, that a Mamin B'Hashem, a believer, understands there's no teva. There's no teva. You think, yeah, rain is a natural process. You see the sun from 93 million miles away sends down light at a speed of 186,000 miles per second. It then shines on the ocean waters. The sun then causes the waters to evaporate, to condense into the clouds, and to rain. No, that's not how it works. That's how it looks, but that's not how it works. Your finances, your health, and everything in a person's life is connected to one's action. Now, obviously, in general, there are exceptions. There's tzaddik v'raloi, there's rasha v'toivloi, but those are the exceptions to the rule. The general rule is it's dependent on a person's ma'aseh. Okay, that's the first point of the Malbim. The Malbim continues. The next pasuk. Es habracha asher tishma'u el mitzvahs Hashem lekechem. What's the blessing if you listen to Hashem your God? Okay, the Malbim makes a very subtle point, and that is, let's say you're a master and you tell your servant, "Hey, servant, I want you to sweep the floor, mop the floor, slice me a bagel, put some egg salad on it, prepare a nice coffee for me, and if you do that, I'll reward you." Would you say that the reward you're giving the servant is inherent in what the servant did for you? No. What the servant did for you is one thing, and the reward that the master gives the servant is completely dependent on the will of the master. The master decided that if the servant serves him, he will reward him. But there's no inherent connection between the service and the reward. Says the Torah, it's not that way with mitzvahs. Let's say a person goes to the doctor. Person, chas Hashem, he has let's say strep throat. Yeah? So he goes to the doctor. The doctor says, "Here, take penicillin, and now you get better." Would you say that the benefit of taking the penicillin is not inherent in the taking of the penicillin? Or it's just dependent on the will of the doctor? Of course not. Inherently in the penicillin is the cure. It's not. When a master rewards his servant, the servant's service is A, and the reward is something that the servant decided upon. But when you take a medicine, the benefit of the medicine is the medicine. It's inherent in the medicine. It's the same thing with the mitzvah, says the Malbim. Don't think that when you put on tefillin, it just so happens to be that God decides that you'll have certain benefit by putting on the tefillin. No. The system is that inherent in the putting on the tefillin are certain physical benefits that you get. It's not external. It's not superficial to the tefillin. It is inherent in the mitzvah. The mitzvah brings the bracha. Es ha-bracha. You know what the bracha is? Asher tishma'u. It's not that the blessing will come as a result. No. The blessing is part of the mitzvah. Es ha-bracha asher tishma'u. Okay. Then the Parsha continues in Pasuk Chav Tes. Pasuk says like this: "V'hayu kiviyach Hashem lekecha la'aretz asher atav Hashem l'rishta." When God will bring you to the land that you're coming to inherit, v'nosata es habracha al har grizim, you should place the blessing on har grizim, v'es haklala al har eval. We all know the Jews visited har grizim and har eval, whereupon some shvatim went to one mountain, some shvatim went to the other, and they had the kohanim in the middle. And they gave a bracha to those who keep the Torah, and they gave a curse to those who don't keep the Torah. Fine. Says the Malbim, what is this? What is the connection between the blessings and curses on Har Grizim and Har Eval? So we mentioned in the beginning of the Parsha that keeping mitzvos or violating mitzvos brings blessing and curse. So the Malbim explains. He says, aside from the fact that the way God created the world is not that when there's a lot of rain, a lot of water in the ocean, and a strong sunlight that produces rain. No, the way the world was created is rain. Success is dependent on your observance of the mitzvos and averos, and it's not external to the mitzvos and averos, but rather it's inherent Aside from that, God says, we're going to set up a second system. And the second system is you're going to accept upon yourself a superimposed system of blessing and curse, aside from the fact that mitzvos and averos have in them inherently blessing and curse. You're going to accept upon yourself a superimposed alternative additional system that you have accepted, that if you keep the Torah, you accept the blessing on Har Grizim and Har Evel, and if you violate, you accept the curses. This is an addition to the inherent system. You're accepting upon yourself a superimposed system. Okay, so that's just the way the Malbim understands the blessings and curses, again, of mitzvah observance and of Har Grizim and Har Evel. Okay, just want to point out, it would then seem from all of this that by keeping the Torah, you get reward in this world, and by violating it, you get punished in this world. And yet we know the Gemara says in Erevin, on the last words in Parshas Vaschanan, on the words Hayoim la'asoisam, which we darshan to mean Hayoim la'asoisam. In this world you keep the Torah, Umachar lekabel scharam, and in the next world you get reward. But you don't get reward in this world. The Gemara says the famous words, Schar b'hayam aleka. There's no reward in this world. The Gemara says, you wear tefillin? Yeah, you'll get rewarded, but not here. You learn? You'll get rewarded, but not here. You don't speak Lashon Hara? You'll get rewarded, but not here. So how does that fit with the entire Parshas Eikev and Parshas Re'eh, where the Parshas are saying that if you keep the Torah, it will rain and you'll be healthy and so forth. What do you mean? Schar b'hayam aleka. Okay, so the Rambam in Hilchos Tshuva sets forth a principle, and we've spoken about this in Parak Tes, Halacha Aleph. The Rambam says, Me'achar shenoida shematan scharan shel mitzvahs v'hatoiva shenizgala is chaye olam haba shenemar laman yitav lach v'harachta yomim, and the punishment of the Rishayim is an olam haba, like the pasuk says, he kares to kares. What is up with most of the Torah which offers promises of reward in this world? Right? How do we reconcile the concept of schar b'hayam aleka with the parshas of Eikev and Re'eh? So the Rambam says a very important principle, and that is, none of the reward mentioned in Parshas Eikev and Re'eh is reward. It's not reward. So what is it? So the Rambam says like this. HaKadosh Baruch Hu nasa lanu Torah. God gave us a Torah. Zu eitz hachayim. The Torah is a tree of life. What are you supposed to do with the Torah? Two things. Number one, most importantly, you have to follow it. You have to keep it. And number two, v'yoidoi deya gemura nechayna, and know it in a complete way, in a proper way. God expects two things from a Jew. Number one, keep the Torah. You have a four-cornered garment, put tzitzis. You put on tefillin every day. You mispalel to learn Torah. You have to have proper bein adam l'chavero. Your speech has to be true, has to be honest. Don't insult people, and so forth. So number one is you have to keep the Torah. Number two is you have to know the Torah. But know the Torah, the Rambam says, Deya Gemura. Deya Gemura means know the Torah in a complete way. Not in a superficial way. In a complete way. In a proper way. You do those two things, Zoicha ba l'chaya olam haba. You get olam haba. How much olam haba do you get? It's dependent on two things. L'fi goyda masav, v'goyda chachmasai. The more you perform, the more chesed you do, the more olam haba. The more you understand the Torah, the more olam haba. So the more we attempt to try to understand Torah, how do we understand Torah? You have to learn it. You have to learn Chumash, you have to learn Navi, you have to learn Ksuvim, you have to learn Gemara, you have to learn Halacha. All of these things, by learning these things, we complete our knowledge of Torah. If you do that, you get Olam Haba. Says the Rambam, what's all this reward in this world? Says the Rambam, V'ivtichanu b'Torah, the Torah promises us. Shem nasa oisa b'simcha, if we keep the mitzvos with joy, with tuvas nefesh, and with a good heart, v'nege b'chachmasei tamid, and we delve into the Torah as much as possible, God will remove from us the obstacles that keep us away from fulfilling in this world what we need to. In other words, God put us in the world for a mission. What's the mission? Keep the Torah, learn the Torah. God sees a Jew attempting to fulfill his purpose in this world. So God says, oh, you got it. You get it. You understand what this world is for. I will remove from you the obstacles. For example, chayli, illness, milchama, war, rav, hunger. V'yashpia lanu kol ha'tovos. God will bestow on us benefits. Hamachazkim es yadinu lasis es kol ha'torah, which give us the ability and the flexibility and the resources to keep the Torah. For example, sova. God will give us sustenance. V'shalom will give us peace. V'rabbi's kesef is of. And it'll give us a lot of money. K'dei shaloi nasei kol yameinu. Right? Because a person doesn't have enough money, well, he's going to spend his whole life making money. Imagine a person spends his whole life making money. God put him on this world to keep the Torah, to learn the Torah. So God says, oh, the guy gets it. I'll help him out. It'll make a living a little bit easier. I'll have more time. Is this reward? This is not reward. This is just God sees a guy, he gets it, he understands what this world is all about. So Hashem says, let me facilitate. It's a facility. God facilitates the objective in this world. However, says the Rambam, but if we forsake the Torah, willingly, v'nasok v'hevlei hazman, and we say, Torah, I'll get there later. First, let me make a lot of money, let me enjoy myself, let me spend my evenings in leisure time. Then God says, this guy doesn't get it. This guy misses the boat. He's not here in this world to go to shows or to waste away his time. So Hashem says, he doesn't get it. I will thereby challenge him to make it more difficult for him to get Olam Haba. Because anyway, he's not pursuing it. Is it a punishment? No, it's not a punishment. But it's a certain system. And the system is, if you get it, God facilitates. Now, it doesn't mean a person says, well, I'm here in this world to keep the Torah and to learn the Torah, so I'm just going to sit here all day and he won't have any troubles in life. No such thing. It just means the certain edge. This world has certain necessary difficulties that make a person's life challenging. When a person really dedicates himself to fulfill his purpose, God makes it easier.
But Tzaddik, you can look on Tzaddik and see that he had a very tough life, but he is not going to see and understand that it was tough life. Maybe facilitated its understanding. It's not just a physical thing.
What do you mean, Tzaddik Viraloi?
Not Viralo, but just in general.
I think
maybe it's understanding.
Most Tzaddikim, have a good life.
No, I know, but I'm saying it's even just to understand.
Let's say a guy like, you hear in the news, there's a certain actor, right? A comedian, and at age 60, he killed himself. Right? So this guy had all the money in the world. He could have whatever he wanted. Right? What did he die of? Depression. Right? He's a badchen, he's a comedian. And what did he die of? He died of depression. Who killed him? He killed himself. His life was so terrible that he killed himself. Right? Well, it's not his fault because he's an alcoholic. What was he now? Right? He's addicted to drugs. So here you have a guy, he has anything he wanted, and he destroyed his own life. So what would Rabbi Victor Miller say? He would say, Rak be'einecha sabit v'shilumas v'shalom tireh. You get what you deserve. You get what you deserve. Rav Miller wrote in his Sava, don't cry for me. I had a very good life. Now, when he had a good life, I don't think he ever went on vacation in his life.
Yeah, I'm saying that God gives the tzaddik the ability to see.
To understand that.
Yeah, that what?
Rabbi Avigdor Miller understood things that we may not understand.
Yeah, now, I don't think he probably never ate a piece of steak.
To cover the
I don't think he ever ate a piece of steak. He ate bread and a piece of chicken, and for him, that he had more enjoyment than the biggest Baal Taiva eating.
That's it. His understanding of God will come out of him and give him this kind of ability to understand.
No, but there's certain brachos, certain health, certain peace of mind. Peace of mind is a bracha.
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about.
Peace of mind is a bracha. But some of the Hasameach B'chalka is a person's own acquisition and own madrega that a person worked on and acquired to be able to be Sameach B'chalka. But Rebbeinu Shem also facilitates Sameach B'chalka. Hashem could give a person a certain personality, help him develop a certain personality to be happy, to be content, to be peaceful, to be healthy. These are all brachos that I don't think anybody will ever be able to point and say, oh look, this guy is a tzaddik. Look at the reward. No, it's obviously Hashem does it in a certain masked way where we don't see the Darkei Hashem. But this is the promise of the Torah, that somebody who keeps the path of the Torah, Hashem facilitates them on their path. I don't know if that doesn't mean they won't have any difficulties. I don't know. That's Olam Hazeh, right? Mesilas Yesharim says, Echad minei elef. You won't even find 1 out of 1,000 people that have absolute serenity in this world. It doesn't exist. There's no such thing. But there's a certain type of bracha that people who keep the Torah have, that they're able to continue on that chosen path. Okay. Doesn't mean there are no obstacles, but that's the concept of Parshas Eikev and Parshas Re'eh. Okay, a few other thoughts. Okay. Then, look at Pasuk in Parak Yud Beis, Pasuk Hey. Okay, this is an interesting idea. Ki imel ha'makayim. Right, it's talking about where you could bring karbanos. Okay, where you could bring karbanos. Look in pasuk Hey. Ki imel ha'makayim, only in the place asher yivchar Hashem lekeichem, that God selected, mikol shivteichem, of all your tribes, lasam eshmai sham, to place His name, l'shichnai sidrashu, you should seek out His dwelling place, uvas Hashem, and go there. Okay? So the pasuk refers to the Beis HaMikdash as Makayim Asher Yivchar Hashem. Place that, who selected? We selected or God selected? God selected. Makayim Asher Yivchar Hashem. The end of the pasuk says, L'shichnai sidrashu, you should seek it out. Which seems like that, no, God doesn't select it, we have to choose it, we have to seek it out. I mean, after God selected, we have to go there? So the Malbim says, it says Uvasa Shama. What's L'shichnai Sidrashu? So the Malbim says a very interesting thing. He says, everywhere in Tanakh, the Beis HaMikdash is called Makayim Asher Yivchar Hashem. Why is Beis HaMikdash called the place that God selected? The answer is because we cannot select it. It had to be selected through the Navi. Like the Navi, God showed David where the Beis HaMikdash was. But even though the Beis HaMikdash is Makam Asher Yivchar Hashem, God has to choose the place, nevertheless, we find that David was doiresh after the Mikdash, where he said, Ad emtza Makam Hashem. That David said, where is the Beis HaMikdash going to be? Where is it going to be? Where is it going to be? He was searching for it, like it says in Tehillim. Right? It says, Im Avai Ba'ayal Beisi. Im Ela Alaras Yitzuai. Im Ayitain Shnas Le'enai La'af Apai Tenuma Ad Emtza Makim Lashem. He says, I'm not going to go into my house, I'm not going to rest, I'm not going to give my slumber to my eyes until I find a place for Hashem. What do you mean find a place for Hashem? You can't find a place for Hashem. Hashem will tell you where He wants to dwell. What was David searching for? Says the Malbim, you see from here, Lahimtin ad Shabbat Elav Navi. David did not wait for the Navi to come to him. But he was looking on his own. But what do you mean it says Asher Yivchar Hashem? The Limaid, David learned. Why is David looking for a place that he can't find? He learned from this pasuk, L'shichnai sidrashu, shehadrisho hima shechoiker ba'atzmai limsai sadavar. The Malbim says, what's the difference? What does the word doiresh mean? Dirshu Hashem b'himatzai. The word doiresh means to investigate on your own, unprompted. That the Beis HaMikdash requires that Jews seek it out, and only then, Limei lahem shelo yigala Hashem soidai. Hashem was teaching that God will not reveal His secret al yedei neviyav, through His prophets. L'hoidiyei makam anivchar, rakim yishtadlu bazeh, only if they try, v'yidrishu acharav, and they seek it out, v'az yara aleim ruach memraimim, and only then God will pour forth a spirit from on high, acharei ha'achana haruya, after the correct preparation. So we see a very important principle. That even though God is saying, I'll let you know where the Beis HaMikdash is, nevertheless, I'll only let you know if you seek it out, and you search, and you're interested, and you... Now, what's he searching for if he doesn't know where it is? Apparently, David HaMelech really wanted it, and he made a certain degree of preparation. What? Maybe he was able to try to calculate and try to find, and he purchased the land from Arvaina. But God, when it comes to the Beis Hamikdash, it's yes, God has to choose, but only after we put in a certain degree of seeking it out. Now, does that apply to the third Beis Hamikdash? You would think it does. You would think this is not just specific to the first and second Beis Hamikdash. You would think, based on this idea of the way the Malbim is reading the pasuk, that you have these organizations in Eretz Yisrael. They want to bring karbanos. Now, whether you're allowed to or not, probably halachically, you can't go to the Makom HaMikdash. But is there a certain Torah attitude in what they're doing? Yeah, it might have a kernel of correctness to it. In other words, you can't just sit back and say, well, Mashiach will come. Whenever God, it's up to God when Mashiach will come, and I'm ready. He'll let me know. I have my phone is on. I don't turn it off at night. And, hopefully I'm getting the text. No, maybe you have to make certain preparations. Maybe I don't know what they are. Maybe you have to learn Hilchos Beis HaBechira. Maybe you have to. I don't know.
Is the principle in Judaism that
you're correct. That certainly, in general, you need to take. Hashem says, "You open for me, Piskuli Pesach. You open for me. You make a little effort, and I'll help you the rest of the way." But it doesn't spell out that idea by every mitzvah. It doesn't say by tzitzis, you take the. It sounds like when it comes to the Beis Hamikdash, there's a special inyan of, even though it's Makom Asher Yivchar, but it requires L'Shichnai Sidrashu. Very interesting. Okay.
Even if a place is pointed out to you, doesn't mean necessarily you can you received everything. You have to go work for it.
I'm sorry. Okay, right. We had when we were learning last year in Masechta Midos, there was a stira in the Rambam as to how are we going to build the third Beis Hamikdash. One pasuk says in Yecheskel that it will become revealed to us, and yet the Rambam says in his introduction to the Masechta Midos that the purpose of Masechta Midos, which is the dimensions of the second Beis Hamikdash, is to know how to build the third Beis Hamikdash. Now, Masechta Midos talks about the dimensions of the second Beis Hamikdash, not the third Beis Hamikdash. So how will learning the dimensions of the second Beis Hamikdash help us build the third one? The third one will be revealed and then when it's built, and then when Mashiach comes. So the Taisus Yom Tov said, no, that only those people who learn Masechta Midos and learn the dimensions of the second Beis Hamikdash will understand the Psukim in Yecheskel when Mashiach comes of how to build the third Beis Hamikdash. In other words, the contradiction was that the Rambam says you learn Masechta Midos to know how to build the third Beis Hamikdash, and yet the Rambam says elsewhere in Hilchos Beis HaBechira that the Psukim in Yecheskel outline to us the details of the third Beis Hamikdash. So it's a stira. Are they in Yecheskel or are they in Masechta Midos? So the Taisus Yom Tov said that only those people who make an effort to learn the dimensions of the second Beis Hamikdash, God will assist them that when Mashiach comes, they'll comprehend the meaning of the Psukim in Yecheskel. Why? Why do you have to do that? Why do you have to first? Why can't Hashem just he'll tell us when Mashiach comes the meaning of the Psukim? Maybe that's an element of L'Shichnai Sidrashu. In other words, we have to put in a certain degree of effort to try to understand the meaning of the Psukim based on Masechta Midos. And if you do that, then Malkam Hashem will explain it to us. Okay. Two more offerings over here. Yeah? Yeah. Yeah, right. Chazal say that Moshe Rabbeinu.
It depends how much you ask.
Right. Okay. Now we know the Mishnah tells us that there were certain periods in history we were allowed to bring private karbanos on a bama, right? You're allowed to bring your own personal karbanos in your backyard. Right? The pasuk says in Yud Beis Zayin, "Va'achaltem sham l'fnei Hashem Elokeichem, u'smachtem b'chol mishach yadchem," that you're allowed to bring a bama. You're allowed to bring karbanos on a bama at certain periods of time. Why? Ki lo yivasem ad ata, you have not yet come, el hamenucha v'el hanachala. Simply, you haven't come to Shiloh yet, and you haven't come to Yerushalayim. When Mishkan Shiloh stands, or when the Beis HaMikdash stands, you can't bring karbanos on a bama. But before Shiloh, you can. After Shiloh, before the Beis HaMikdash, you can. Ki lo yivasem ad ata el hamenucha v'el hanachala. Now, if the Malbim's perush, as much as it's a perush on the Psukim, is a perush on the Sifri. Sifri is the Tar Shabal Peh on Devarim. The Malbim put in extra special efforts. I'll show you, I'll read to you. My grandfather has in his notes. Hikdish avoida miyuchedes l'sakein es girsas hamechilta sifra v'sifri. The Malbim put in extra emphasis to get the correct text of the Sifri. In fact, in one place in this week's Parsha, the Malbim argues on the Gra in the Girsa and the Sifri. And to argue on the Gra, you have to have big plates, especially in terms of Girsa. The Gra, we know, was Masake in many portions of Tar Shabal. Anyway, the Malbim brings the machlokes. There's a machlokes in the Sifri. What's Menucha and what's Nachala? Reb Shimon says Nachala is Shiloi, and Menucha is Yerushalayim. Shenemar Zois Menuchasi Adei Ad. Divrei Reb Shimon. Reb Yehuda Omer Chiluf Hadvarim. Reb Yehuda says no. Menucha is Shiloi, Nachala is Yerushalayim. Okay, so it's machlokes. Ki lo yivasem ad ata el hamenucha v'el hanachala. Which one of them is Shiloi? One of them is Yerushalayim. Which one is which? It's a machlokes Tanan. So the Malbim says, what is this machlokes based on? Whether Yerushalayim is Menucha or Yerushalayim is Nachala. Now, the Rebbe Yehuda holds that Yerushalayim is called Nachala. There's a pasuk, Hoysali Nachalasi Ka'aryeh B'yar. Says the Malbim, what's this machlokes based on? Rabbi Yehuda and Reb Shimon are going l'shitase. There's a machlokes Tanoim whether Yerushalayim was divided among the Shvatim or Yerushalayim is universal. Is Yerushalayim nischalek l'Shvatim or loy nischalek Yerushalayim l'Shvatim? Right? We were learning in Masechta Megillah in the beginning of the 4th parak. Right? On Daf Chavav, the Gemara says that there's an opinion that if you go to Yerushalayim and you stay in someone's house for the Shosh Regalim, you don't have to pay rent. Why? Because I own it. Yeah, there's an opinion. You could knock on someone's door. You know, who's there? Glatstein. What do you want? It's Erev Yom Tov. Exactly. I'm here for Yom Tov. Right? Say, Yom Tov, you know how much an apartment is in Yerushalayim for Sukkot? It's like $2,000. I have someone in my family who lives in Eretz Yisrael. So he moves out of for many years, he moved out of his apartment in Yerushalayim. What he gets for Sukkot and Pesach, he's able to pay like half the year's rent. He said, no, but you didn't learn the Gemara Megillah. On a regel, I own it just as much. And there's an opinion like that. So says the Malbim.
I'll try it this year.
Don't quote me on this. But says the Gemara, Reb Shimon holds Yerushalayim was lo nischalek l'shvatim. So therefore you can't call it Nachla. It's not a Nachla. Nobody has Nachla in it. So therefore Reb Shimon holds it's called Menucha. Well, fine. But right, maybe exactly. That's a Hoysali Nachalasi. But in terms of Kiloi Vasem Adoba, but when Hashem is talking to you, to Klai, and is saying you haven't come to Nachala, so Reb Shimon says you can't. That is not appropriate to call it Yerushalayim.
But isn't it Yerushalayim doesn't belong to anybody except?
But Shiloh could be called Nachala. Why? Who would Shiloh belong to? Yosef. But Rabbi Yehuda holds Yerushalayim is Nischalek l'Shvatim, and therefore it is called Nachala. Okay. One more thing. One last thing. Okay? One last thing.
But isn't Yerushalayim was conquered after the Chalukah?
But still, now the question is Yerushalayim, now that it's conquered, that's only that, no, that's only that portion of it. But what about the whole city?
The Kodesh HaKodeshim belonged to Binyamin, but the rest belonged to nobody.
Or Yehuda, the rest belonged to Yehuda. Ritzua is Nafka. But it's machlokes. It's machlokes. It's machlokes Tanoim. Machlokes in Gemara Megillah in the beginning of the 4th parak. Whether Yerushalayim is Nischalek l'Shvatim, it doesn't matter when he bought it. Doesn't matter when he bought it. It's divided. It just happens that we don't own it yet. But it's the question is it divided? Is it not divided? The fact now is halachically, the fact that he did not conquer Yerushalayim made it that his other conquerings of Aram Tzova, Aram Naharaim, did not have Kedusha, full Kedusha Eretz Yisrael, because since he didn't conquer Yerushalayim, so therefore how could... Okay. Pasuk says like this. Okay, quickly. It says, Es hanachri tigais. It says during Shemitah, you can't approach your friend to collect a loan, right? But a guy, Es hanachri tigais, you could approach a guy. And by the way, it's the same lashon by Ribbis. Es hanachri tishach. Charge interest. Chazal say, the Sifri brings down, Zu mitzvah saseh. This is a mitzvah d'oraisa. That during Shemitah, collect from the guy. That take ribbis from a guy. It's a mitzvah d'oraisa. And the Rambam in Hilchos Malbim brings down, it's a mitzvah d'oraisa to collect money from a guy during Shemitah, or to charge a guy interest. So the Ravid asks, I must have missed that day in yeshiva when the Rebbe taught about this mitzvah d'oraisa of charging interest to a guy. It's a mitzvah in the Torah to charge interest to a guy. It's a mitzvah in the Torah to collect during Shemitah. So you have a guy, what do you do for... I'm interested in mitzvahs. What mitzvahs do you do? I go lend money to goyim with interest. Well, it's a mitzvah d'oraisa to go lend them money with interest. So what? Maybe instead of doing chesed, we should go extend loans to goyim with interest. It's a mitzvah d'oraisa, and the Rambam writes, Zu mitzvah d'oraisa. So Rabbi says, I must have missed that day in yeshiva when the Rebbe taught about this. I must have missed that on Har Sinai when God gave us the mitzvah of charging goyim interest. It's a mitzvah. Maybe you're allowed to, but what's the mitzvah? So the Malbim defends the Rambam by explaining it's not a mitzvah d'oraisa. What it means is, when Hashem says, collect from a guy during Shemitah or charge a guy interest, it's a lav haba mechlal aseh aseh. Which means, you lend the guy money with interest, but you're not allowed to lend, by inference, you can lend a guy, but you can't lend a yid. So the mitzvah aseh d'oraisa is, lend to a guy, that's not saying that you should dafka lend to a guy with interest. From there we derive that if you lend to a Jew with interest, not only are you violating a lav, you're also violating an aseh. When the Rambam writes, Zu mitzvah aseh, it doesn't mean dafka to lend to the guy, or dafka to not to cancel out the loan of the guy. He means from there to derive that there is a mitzvah aseh not to do that to a Jew. Okay, and really, this is the last thing. So it says like this: you lend money to a Jew, cancel the debt, don't approach him during Shemitah. Pasuk Daled. Efes ki lo yeh b'cha avyan. Only Efes, you will not have any poor people, because God will bless you in Eretz Yisrael. In other words, what it's saying is, in the zechus of canceling loans, you'll have what? God will remove the poor from the land. As a benefit for your lending money and not collecting it during Shemitah, the blessing will be that the poor will be eliminated from the world. What's the lashon efes? Efes is a miyot. Why does the Torah use the word efes? Isn't that unusual? Says the Malbim, where else do we find the word efes? In Shalach. V'gam zavas chalav u'devash. It's wonderful. It's flowing milk and honey. Efes kiyasa but don't go there because the people are mighty. Efes means despite everything until now, but it's a big but. It's a miyot. What's the miyot over here? Says the Malbim, look back at the beginning of the Parsha. In the beginning of the Parsha, we learned that if a person does mitzvahs, God usually facilitates your ability to do more mitzvahs. Person learns, for example, the Malbim says, if you're careful in Kiddush, God will give you hundreds of barrels of wine, like we learned yesterday in the Gemara Megillah. If a person is careful in tzedakah, God will give him more money to do more mitzvahs. But not in this case. In this case, it's the exception to the rule. In this case, even though you've extended yourself, you lent money, and you didn't collect it during Shemitah, you should know that this mitzvah, God will have to facilitate your ability to do mitzvahs elsewhere, but not to be able to lend more money to aniyim. You know why? Efes ki lo yeh b'cha evyain. Because the zchus of this mitzvah is there won't be any more people. So even though normally, if you try to carefully to learn Torah, God will facilitate your ability to learn more Torah. And if you try to be Mekayim Kiddush, God will give you more wine. And if you're careful in mezuzah, God will give you better mezuzahs. But if you're careful not collecting money in Shemitah, this is the one mitzvah, God will not facilitate your ability to do it more. You know why? In this mitzvah, the zchus is, there won't be any more poor people, and you'll have to get your mitzvahs elsewhere.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.